Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. We are on here today with Harold Pryor. He is running for state attorney in the 17th Judicial Circuit here in Broward County. Good afternoon, sir. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Mr. Adams. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very
Good.
much. And thank you
Good.
very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to stop by the Adams Brothers Podcast.
No problem.
And we just want to ask you some questions. So we'll start out. We'll just ask you to introduce yourself. Tell us about your background, how you became an attorney, where you're from, your education, and how long you've been practicing law.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, thank you, Daryl, and thank you, Wayne, for sharing your platform with me, having me here to share who I am. For those who are listening or watching this, who don't know me, my name is Harold Pryor. I'm a proud husband. I'm a proud father. I'm a proud attorney, but also I'm a proud Black man. I am unapologetically Black. To give you a little bit more on me, I grew up in Florida, born and raised. I'm a fifth generation Floridian. You don't see too many of those walking around.
All right.
I grew up on the east coast of Florida, grew up in the Tampa Bay area, particularly in a small town, Dade City, Florida. So I'm a country boy, as they call it. And so I grew up in a rather tough neighborhood. I was the only kid on my block that had both my mom and my dad in my household. And so that had a profound effect on both myself and my brothers, and also many of the kids in my neighborhood as well, because my dad was kind of like that surrogate father for so many kids in the neighborhood. But also we had to fight to not succumb to some of the pressures that we saw every day, that many people in some of our neighborhoods see every day. I came up during the era towards the end of the crack era, where we saw crack cocaine and the failed war on drugs decimate millions of Black families throughout the country. And my family fell victim to it. I had countless family members who were drug dealers, but also countless family members who were addicted to drugs. And so we saw a criminal justice system treat them less than because of the color of their skin, or we saw a criminal justice system treat them inequitably because of the color of their skin. We saw how the unfair sentencing disparities of powder cocaine versus crack cocaine decimate Black families as opposed to white families. I had cousins who served 8 years, almost 10 years in state custody and federal custody for crack cocaine, as opposed to their counterparts that was caught with powder cocaine. We saw that gross inequities in the system. I've experienced it, I've seen it. But also I've had family members who were brutally murdered and close friends who were brutally murdered. And we watched the criminal justice system treat them less than because of the color of their skin. But also I had family members who had mental health issues, and we saw that a criminal justice system treat them less than and not get them the help that they need, but we saw their lives spiral downward. And so I'm running for state attorney because I have these combined lived experiences, but also professional experiences. I served as a prosecutor where I tried misdemeanor offenses all the way to serious felonies offenses. I served as an in-house counsel for a multi-million-dollar telecommunications company. So with my combined experience, both in life and in the professional aspect, I truly believe I'm the best suited person to be the next state attorney for Broward County. But finally, to close out on that point, look, I'm a married man. I'm married to a Black woman, an immigrant, Jamaican woman, and I have a 2-year-old Black son. And we worry every day. My wife and I worry every day. How are we going to raise our boy in this dangerous world? And so I think with that understanding, with me coming from 5 generations of prior men who've had to have that discussion of how do you interact with law enforcement or authority figures, I think it's about time we have that level of perspective in our prosecutor's office here in Broward County.
Well, that's very impressive right there, and that's a nice story of your background there and how you grew up around drugs and everything, which that was going to kind of like lead me on into my first question, which will be, do you feel that the war on drugs has been effective or ineffective?
It's ineffective and it's failed. It's failed miserably. I feel that the intended effect of it was to displace and penalize people of color, as opposed to other segments of our society. The proof is in the pudding, as they would say, right? Look at how the failed war on drugs has affected the Black family. I can't tell you how many friends and family members whose families have been decimated because of a family member going away because of a drug addiction issue. The failed war on drugs, it didn't take into account the different categories of offenses. They didn't look at a dealer differently than an addict, right? If you scored a certain amount of points, you're going to serve that certain amount of time due to mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines, right? And so because of that, and as a direct result of that, many Black fathers were being sent away to prison, right? They were serving their bids rather than spending 4 years or however many years to go to college or of higher institution. They're going to a federal or state penitentiary or state institution and being locked away and being kept away from their families. And so you saw this gap that was created in our communities, and you saw the decimation of the Black family in our communities. And so now we're still recovering from that. We still have a mass incarceration issue as a result of that. We have gross racial sentencing disparities because of the failed war on drugs. And so it's time for us to have state attorneys and elected officials that understand that and are willing to reform the system. What I always say, Daryl, is that if you're going to be a sheriff in any county, if you're going to be a chief prosecutor in any county, you have to understand that when we talk about the criminal justice system, we're talking about a system that has been traditionally stacked against people of color and poor folk. If you can't acknowledge that, if you don't acknowledge that, you don't need to be in that role. You don't need to be in that position, and we shouldn't be voting you in.
Yeah, it's intimidating because if you're arrested for drugs and everything, and and you go down to that courthouse and you're in front of that judge, and when you walk in that courtroom and you don't see anybody in that courtroom that looks like you or me or Wayne, it's intimidating. So I tell you, it's very intimidating.
It is, and look, but and I like to say this too, and to go to your point, Daryl, and my granddaddy would always say this, and my dad would say, all skin folk ain't kin folk. So just because you got someone in there that looks like you, don't mean they're actually about your issues, right?
Absolutely.
And so I constantly try to tell our people that just because you see me and I'm a Black man, don't assume that you think that I'm going to do this and that to help our people. You need to vet me. You need to look at my issues. You need to see me as a man and talk to me and see if you agree with it. And I'll venture to say that when you talk to me, when you see the fabric of who I am and the cloth that I'm cut from, I think you'll find that I'm passionate about our issues. I'm passionate about Black issues and understand what's at stake. And we need to hold all our elected officials' feet to the fire when it comes to holding them accountable and putting them in office. And that's irrespective of color, right? But yeah, we do need a state attorney's office and sheriff's offices and law enforcement offices around the county, around the country, to be reflective of the communities that they serve.
Well, thank you for answering that question, because we, the Adams brothers, we believe in holding public officials accountable, and there has to be accountability in any public office. And that's one of the reasons why we are here podcasting right now, because we believe in public accountability.
Yeah, it's important. We have to.
Absolutely.
Too much is at stake. Too much is at stake.
Right.
It's just when you look at the same state attorney in office for 40 plus years, it'd be 44 years coming up at the end of this year, right? And really his feet hasn't been held to the fire. We haven't been able to hold him accountable because he's been under the radar, or he hasn't lend himself to be subject to criticism from the community. I'm telling you right now that when I'm elected, I'm going to be holding my neck out there. I'm going to hold myself accountable. I'm going to do the quarterly reports to the community so they see what we're doing. And if you see something that we're doing or not doing, I want you as a community to come to me and say, State Attorney Pryor, you're not doing this, or you're missing the mark there. So I can be held accountable, and I can do something about it. Far too often our elected officials are taking these offices and they're just sitting on their laurels, and they're not giving back to the community or being held accountable. And that's just not me, because I'm an elected official. You put me in the office. I didn't put myself there. You put me in office. And so I should be working for you.
Absolutely. Wayne?
Okay, Mr. Pryor. Have you ever been disciplined by the Florida Bar Association?
No, and I hope to never be disciplined by the Florida Bar.
And you touched on earlier about the high rate of incarceration. What do you believe are the causes of the high rate of minority incarceration?
Well, I'll cut right to the chase. It's racism. Racism has been ingrained in the very institutions that touched our daily lives on a daily basis. When you look at education, when you look at the criminal justice system, when you look at law enforcement, when you look at the economic, financial system, all these systems have been traditionally stacked against people of color, right? So racism is at the core of that, right? But let's look at the logistics of the criminal justice system. The reason why there's a mass incarceration issue amongst our minority communities is several things. The sentencing guidelines, right? Mandatory minimum sentencing, right? Also, when you look at mandatory minimum sentencing, you look at the legislation, our legislators, the laws that they pass, and the motivation behind why they pass certain laws. And then you have to look at the criminal justice system and people's daily interactions, right? Our communities and people of color's communities are over policed, right? And so when you're over policed, you're going to have contact with the criminal justice system. My fundamental belief as state attorney is we should not prosecute certain low-level offenses and low-level drug offenses. I fundamentally believe that when you limit someone's contact, first-time contact with the criminal justice system, you will see a incarceration issue that we have in this country. If you look at the plethora of the cases that take up a lot of the criminal dockets in Broward County, overwhelming majority of the cases are misdemeanor offenses, right? Mm-hmm. And so, for example, low-level drug offenses, possession of marijuana, driving while license suspended, petty thefts, those type of crimes, right? I call those crimes of poverty, right? We're far too often criminalizing poverty. So when you look at the majority of the cases that are in misdemeanor courts, they're all people of color, Black folk, right? Colored folk, right? So my theory is that if we lower someone's first time interaction with the criminal justice system, we'll then see a lower number of cases coming into our office, and we'll see a lower number of people actually coming into the criminal justice system and creating that vicious cycle. So for example, if you have a young man who's being pulled over for a minor traffic infraction, officer sees marijuana in the car and it's less than 20 grams, right? He's taken in or he's offered a notice to appear, and then he comes in and he's not gonna, most times they're not gonna serve jail for a first time marijuana possession case. They may go into a diversion program, right? But let's say you have that situation where some people don't go into a diversion program and they're placed on probation. So you have a first time offender who's placed on probation, 6 months probation. He violates that probation, right? And for some reason or another, he's put back into the system. He's put into jail. He's put in for 30 days or however many days. That affects his ability to make money, right? So then he gets out and then he commits another crime. He gets into another vicious cycle. Then he moves up to a bigger crime, a larger crime, a felony. Then he's a convicted felony. So then you see this vicious cycle. This is a real life experience or example of how someone's life can be changed by being thrown into that vicious cycle. So as state attorney, I want to lower people's first time contact with the criminal justice system by not prosecuting certain driving traffic offenses, like driving while license suspended for, whatever financial obligation, whether it be certain low-level drug offenses. We will not prosecute possession of cannabis cases 20 grams or less. That will lower the case count substantially in your state attorney's office. It'll cut some of the funding that we use, and we can use that funding to go to some of the more serious crimes as opposed to some of the low-level offenses that no one cares about, that doesn't pose a danger to the community.
Okay. Do you believe the makeup of juries adequately and fairly reflects society at large in Broward County in 2020?
That's a nuanced question. We have to serve. We have to, Black folk, people of color, you can't ignore those jury notices, right? That's first and foremost. If you get it, look, I always say this, when I pick juries, I've picked countless juries, right? And one of the things that I always say when we do the voir dire process, when you're selecting your jury panel for your trial, I always say to the jury panelists that are there, I want to thank you for serving, because I view this next to the highest form of civic duty. There's three in my opinion. That's serving in the military, that's voting, and actually serving on a jury. It's one of the most highest civic duties that you can perform as a citizen in the United States. And so I encourage people, if you get those jury notices, you need to come, because we truly need a jury that is reflective of the community. And we know that Broward County is a minority majority community. 57% of the population of Broward County is made up of racial minority. We have to have a state attorney's office that is committed to ensuring that these juries are diverse. We shouldn't be striking Black and brown jurors from serving just because, right? You oftentimes would see prosecutors striking Black and brown people because they would make the automatic assumption, oh, well, she's probably going to side with the defendant, or he's probably going to side with the defendant, when that's not necessarily the case. We all know that, right? But I think it could be better. And I think how that can be better, it's twofold. First, we as people of color, we need to accept these jury notices and show up and show out. And then also the second prong of that is we need a state attorney's office and prosecutors that are dedicated to ensuring that the jury pools that we use for any given case is more reflective of the community, meaning we need to keep more Black and brown people in those jury panels.
Okay, thank you, Daryl.
Do you believe there's an underrepresentation of women and people of color in the court system? And if so, how would you work to correct the problem?
Yes, there is an underrepresentation. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I've heard a statistic that, 16% or nearly 20% of the state attorney's office now made up of Black men, about 16 or 17 Hispanic, 17%, Hispanic, and apparently there's about 30 to 40% of the makeup of the office is women. There should be more. I'm just gonna be honest, there should be more. And there's no excuse. Look, I was an in-house counsel for a multi-million-dollar telecommunications company. And when you wanted a talented engineer, or when you wanted a talented a business mind, or someone in the sales department, or someone with a particular business acumen that can help your business grow and develop, you hire headhunters, you hire HR firms to go out and seek these talented individuals. As state attorney, I will have a workforce of human resources individuals that will not only just be committed to working in our office, but also actually going out to historically Black colleges, going to all these various universities and recruiting more women to come work for our offices, recruiting more Black and brown men and women to come work for our office. And also we need more members from the LGBTQ plus community to work in our office as well. Because I feel that demographic is underrepresented in office, and we have a large LGBTQ plus community in Broward County, and they need representation as well. They need people that can actually understand and actually reflect their communities as well. And so I'm dedicated to that. I'm committed to that because, for example, I will be the CEO of a massive public entity with 511 employees. And so we need to govern ourselves accordingly, that we're running a large entity and we need to comport to that. And so we have to be dedicated to having a diverse entity that can represent the citizens of Broward County, but also it restores trust when you have a workforce that is reflective of the community that it serves.
Thank you for that question. Now, thank you for that answer, I should say, because it definitely has to have some diverse, it has to be diverse down at the state attorney's office. It has to look like Broward County. Too often you walk into these places and it's all these men here and it's not enough women, or it's vice versa. I believe it has to be Black, white, Hispanic, Haitian. It has to look like Broward County.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, Mr. Pryor, in your opinion, what is the biggest challenge facing the Broward County State Attorney's Office, and how do you plan to address it?
Well, where where do I start? It's been 44 years of the same. I think first it's just measuring expectations and really changing of the old guard. It's going to take a lot of work to kind of change some learned practices and habits and break some of those learned practices and habits. I think one of the main things or the tough challenges is to change the outlook and views of what a prosecutor is, what a state attorney is. Also, how we value and evaluate our prosecutors, changing the metric system on how we evaluate and value our prosecutors. A brief crash course on the criminal justice system and state attorneys. Traditionally in the criminal justice system, if you had a high conviction rate, you were seen as an ideal or a perfect prosecutor. If you had a low conviction rate, you were seen as a terrible prosecutor. What's going on with this individual? He or she is losing so many cases, so many not guilty. Something's wrong with this particular prosecutor. When you look at the reality of the situation, it isn't always that, right? We have to put justice, fairness, and equality back into the criminal justice system. And so we can no longer, and we should no longer be evaluating or valuing our prosecutors based on conviction rate. It should be justice, fairness, and equality. What are you doing to ensure that the prosecutorial process through every stage is fair, just, and equitable to that individual? Sometimes justice and fairness and equality is a not guilty verdict. Sometimes it is a guilty verdict. And sometimes that is dropping a case. And sometimes that's not even filing the case from the onset if it's presented to you. And so we have to change the metric system and how we evaluate our prosecutors. And we need to comport ourselves to those basic tenets and principles of justice, fairness, and equality.
What do you think is more important, justice or truth?
Truth. I truly believe that the truth is that what they say, the truth will set you free, right?
Yes.
And I believe that goes both ways, right? If you're being truthful and if the truth is there, a particular person that an issue is being brought against them, they're going to be free. They're not going to be in custody and chains, right? They're not going to be in someone's criminal justice institution. But also it goes both ways. I always, look, I served as a prosecutor. And people would always tell me, and like, man, how could you be a prosecutor, man? You black man. And especially when they heard my story, like where you come from and what you've seen, how could you be a prosecutor? And I said, I actually wanted to be a public defender. But then when I saw that they make the decisions, a state attorney can make that decision, and we needed more people that looked like me and came from my community to actually bring that level of understanding to that side to ensure that we're not locking people away for circumstances or locking people away unjustly, right? And so I always tell people, man, I go to sleep on a cool side of the pillow every night because I knew that everything that I did was based on those principles that I mentioned earlier and that I was always seeking the truth. I will instruct my prosecutors, no, your goal, your job, your duty is not to get a guilty verdict. That's not what it's about. Your goal in life as a prosecutor, when you work for my office, is to seek the truth. When you seek the truth, the right outcome will happen. If you seek the truth and the truth is the truth, that's a guilty verdict, right? Mm-hmm. That bad person is going to jail, right? If it warrants it, right? Or that bad person or that person that may have committed a particular crime and it doesn't warrant jail, that person's going to get probation, right? They're going to get a just, right? But if you seek the truth and it comes out that maybe they got the wrong guy, you're going to feel comfortable. You could go into a courtroom and stand up to the judge and say, Your Honor, we announce a no pros, which essentially says we're dropping the case. It's so funny. People used to laugh at me because when I would announce a no pros, I would do it with pride and smiling, right? And they're like, why are you smiling? You just lost the case. And I say, no, my friend, I don't see it as wins or losses. I see it as seeking the truth. We need to bring that into the criminal justice system. When we bring that into the criminal justice system, we'll see this mass incarceration issue go away. We'll see this racial sentencing disparity issue go away. And we'll see an end to the school to prison pipeline because we're seeking the truth.
And a follow-up to that question, I like how you explain that. What is your approach towards negotiating plea bargains versus going to trial in a criminal case? Because I heard when you said that, that kind of in line right with the question that I'm asking right now. How do you
and you know, if you would have let me keep talking, I would have went right into it. So we on the same page. Look, I truly believe, and when I served as a prosecutor, because, you know, I didn't need to go to law school to know this. I had family members and friends who were in the criminal justice system, and they oftentimes were punished because they wanted to exercise their constitutional right to take something to trial, right? I truly believe a prosecutor should not use that as leverage. Just because someone decides that they want to take something to trial or they want to fight their case to the best of their ability, you shouldn't use that as a bargaining tool to up the charge on someone, right? I truly believe that as a prosecutor, you should not make your recommendations or plea offers based on a probable cause affidavit alone, or arrest warrant, as some people may call it, alone. Because we know that sometimes law enforcement officers, they tend to exaggerate certain facts.
Oh, I know. I had it happen to me once.
Yeah. And so I think it's a mistake. I think it's a grave mistake whenever you as a prosecutor, you make your sole determination and offer in a particular case based on a probable cause affidavit or a warrant alone. I truly believe that you should do due diligence on your part to actually vet that, do the background research on that, and then make your offer. So with that said, we shouldn't be punishing people because they choose, okay, like for example, you have a situation, oh, well, he's scoring 15 years. Okay, well, I'll offer you 15 years. You take it today, or you take it by the X amount of date. And if you don't exercise your right to waive speedy trial, if you don't waive speedy trial, then we're gonna up it, right? Those type of offers. I think that's unfair. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't leverage someone's constitutional right against them, right? I think right is right, fair is fair, and I will be training my prosecutors accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Daryl.
Do you believe that there's systemic racism in our criminal justice system? And if so, how would you work to fix it?
Yes,
At the state attorney's office.
Yes, Daryl, there is systemic racism in the criminal justice system. And as I alluded to earlier, there's a systemic racism in virtually every institution in this country. And we're seeing that now. People are starting to realize that. Even our white allies are starting to realize now. It's terrible that it took them so long to realize that, but they're realizing. There is systemic racism in the criminal justice system. Let's look at law enforcement. Law enforcement in certain areas was created as slave patrols to keep the slaves in line, right? And so then you see the evolution into what we have now, and not much has changed with certain law enforcement agencies around the country. Now, in the state attorney's office, there is systemic racism, not only in Broward, but throughout the country. How do we fix that? Now, there's certain ways that we can fix that. That's by hiring. We have to do a better job of hiring and vetting the people that we're letting into these institutions. But what happens if you do hire someone? Not many people are holding up their hands and saying, hi, yes, sir, I'm a racist, right? You don't find that out until their actual actions, until you actually see what they're doing and you let them get into their element. And so there's ways that we can do that. One, I truly believe, and there is software out there. I've spoke with criminologists around the country and certain state attorneys throughout the country who are progressive minded. There's software out there where you can track your prosecutors' offers in every single case that they have. You can track it from its very inception, the offers that they give in a case. You can track the disposition or the finality of the case, right? And the sentencing in those particular cases. And so that goes to the accountability portion that we spoke about earlier. On a quarterly basis and an annual basis, we're going to generate a report based off this software. This software will be available to the community and defense attorneys around the circuit. And we will get to look at prosecutor A, who has 300 cases, and we get to look at his or her offers the sentencing of those cases, the final disposition of those cases, and we'll be able to look at all types of demographical information, demographic based on race, gender, geographical region within the county. And we can look at prosecutor and say, well, you have crime number 2, that you tend to be a little bit more heavy-handed on people of color versus white people, or people in certain area codes versus another area code. So that's one way that we can kind of track that racism or bias that's hidden on the inside, that's not readily available or seen in the criminal justice system. So what do we do with that information? I'm not just going to keep that information close to the hip or just share it with the community. If we see that we have a prosecutor that is trending to do that, we're going to let that prosecutor go. We're going to thank them for the service, and we're going to let them go, right? Next, another component is to have a robust, racial and implicit bias training program. Not the once a year or twice a year thing, but something that's going on from the moment you start in the Harold Pryor State Attorney's office. From your last day, you will receive continuous, monthly, robust racial and implicit bias training. I think it's important that we do that, right? Now, there's critics to that to say, well, yeah, you can do racial and implicit bias training program, but it doesn't fix racism. It doesn't fix that person who is racist. I agree. Racial and implicit bias training is for that individual, that white individual, that white person who may not have hate in their heart, right? But because of the system that we're in, because of the country we're in, because racism is so ingrained in the very institutions that affect our daily lives, you may not intend to be racist. Your actions may not intend to be racist-minded or racist-hearted, but the effect is in fact racist because you don't know any better. And that's what racial and implicit bias training is for, is to help those law enforcement officers or state attorneys who are white, who may not have gone up in the same demographics and the same neighborhoods as you and I, to provide them with the different aspects so they can actually see some of the things that they haven't been privy to because of their upbringing and because of who they are. Their very nature, they're not racist. It's just they happen to grow up in the system that has benefited the privilege, right? The privileged few and people who are not colored, right? And so that's what we're for racial. I say racial and implicit bias training is for the willing, right? The people that are your allies, the people that are there, but they really don't understand. Racial and implicit bias training is to help those people that are our allies that are there understand, to actually see what we're going through, to look behind the veil, and to actually see how the system has negatively affected people of color. And so I think you have to have robust racial implicit bias training programs, not only in state attorney's offices, but they need to be in law enforcement offices, and we need to integrate them into school curriculum with our little kids. I think we need to have racial implicit bias training curriculums for kids that are growing up in school, so at least when they're going home, they can see some of the things that mom and daddy might be doing that might not be right, and they understand the deep-seated core of racism, and that's just basically ingrained in the fabric of this country. I think if we start there and we continue it in every aspect, not only criminal justice, but education and economics and sales and business, I think we can see a global change in this thing we call racism, or the sickness I call, or disease that I call racism.
Yes, training is very critical because I know firsthand, I work with diverse, people on my job, and some of them didn't grow up around Black people, so
right.
It's maybe they don't see some things, or they may say some things that they're not aware of, and that may be hurtful to another person, but through training that would help them understand. So training is very, very critical. So I like that part. I was just going to tell you that. I was like, yeah, training is very important.
It is.
Right?
Okay. As Broward County State Attorney, would you show preferential treatment to a law enforcement officer accused of a crime?
No. A law enforcement officer will be treated like any other citizen. Just because you have on a badge you will not receive a preferential or special treatment under Harold Pryor administration. We have to hold everyone accountable. That's a big theme in my campaign and my race is accountability. I want people to hold me accountable, and I want to hold everyone accountable. I want to hold elected officials accountable. We'll bring charges against elected officials if they violate the trust, as if you endorsed me or didn't endorse me. If you violate the people's trust and taxpayer dollars, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. That goes for any law enforcement officer that has a badge. We have to hold them accountable. We have to do this to restore or at least create trust, the people's trust in the criminal justice system. There's checks and balances. And I truly believe that we are, the state attorney is that check on law enforcement. If a law enforcement officer is accused of misconduct and commit a criminal act, we shouldn't submit those cases to grand juries. We should make a filing decision expeditiously, and it should be an open and transparent process so where I can be held accountable. Because the moment I decide not to bring charges against a law enforcement officer, I want the people to hold me accountable and come talk to me so I can tell them, well, here's the sound legal reasoning as to why I didn't bring charges against a law enforcement officer. But the moment I decide to bring charges against a law enforcement officer, I will be ready as a man to stand up and speak up to the law enforcement agencies and the police union and give them the reasoning as to why I decided to bring charges against a law enforcement officer. So I believe it should be an open and transparent process, and we should hold law enforcement officers accountable irrespective of the fact that they have a badge on. We have to treat them like everyone else.
And why do you think here in Broward County, it is so hard to get a conviction on a police officer accused most of the time on tape? Why is it so hard to get a conviction on them in Broward County, especially for murder? I mean, I know a few people here over the past years that they killed. Like one case is like Jermaine McBean. He was murdered walking home from a pawn shop, I believe in Oakland Park.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard to even, I mean, most of the time, the cases get to the judge, and a lot of times the judge throw them out. I mean, I know that's out of your hand, but why is it so hard for it to even get justice against the police officer?
Well, it goes to the long-standing belief that you have that blue veil, right? The blue code of silence, and often state attorneys, prosecutors were a part of that in protecting law enforcement officers. It was always we default or we err on the side of the law enforcement officer. What the law enforcement officer says is gospel. But what we're learning is that is not in fact the truth. Well, we've always known it, but many of our allies or other people just failed to realize that and just chose to ignore it. The problem is we've had prosecutors in the country, not only Broward County, but in the country, who've not been willing to hold them accountable, law enforcement officers accountable, because police unions are powerful. Many prosecutors receiving donations and campaign contributions from police unions or individuals affiliated with the police union. So they were often afraid to do anything regarding misconduct or err on the side of what a law enforcement officer says. That's why I've consciously decided not to receive funds from police unions or law enforcement agencies, because I want to show that we can keep that level of independence, and I will maintain that level of independence. And so what we find in the criminal justice system and what we've traditionally seen is prosecutors, to protect themselves or to cover their behinds for political expediency, whenever there's a police misconduct issue, they would submit that to a grand jury, right? Why do you submit that to a grand jury? When you submit a case to a grand jury for their determination, whether they decide to come back with indictment or not, that information or the evidence submitted in a grand jury or the proceedings from a grand jury is sealed. Everyone in that process is sworn to secrecy. None of the information in that grand jury is made public. So you would traditionally have prosecutors, when that grand jury would come back with no true bill or no indictment, a prosecutor could then just hold up their hands and say, well, it's sealed. I can't talk about it. The grand jury made the decision. Sorry, it's not me, right? That's the problem. And then so it just go on and on. But also another issue is, look, there's a statement, and a good friend of mine and mentor, I heard it from him, and I know it's been attributed to so many people before, but it's the first time I heard it was from him, was that a prosecutor, it's often said, and Attorney Johnny McCrae told me this, he said, it's often said that a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich, right? And it's true, because we call grand juries the prosecutor show, right? That's the only, tribunal process where a prosecutor is really and truly center stage. You have all the evidence at your disposal. You have the panel of grand jury members. You have a judge that presides, and you have leeway to present whatever you want to a grand jury, and it's extremely one-sided. No criminal defense attorney can stand up and object. You can present all the evidence that you want. And so if you present that evidence as vigorously as you could if it was a black person that you're trying to bring charges against, I guarantee 99.9% of the law enforcement officers that were brought before a grand jury, they would be indicted. But traditionally, prosecutors have approached that process less than vigorously because that person had on a badge. And so that won't be the case under a Harold Pryor administration, because for one, we're not submitting those to a grand jury. Those are going to be made in an open and transparent process. And once my investigation is open, everyone will know how I came to that decision. Obviously, we can't release that information in real time because it's a real investigation. But once that determination is made, it's subject to public records request. Once it's made, it's out in the open, and I'm held accountable to the public. Now, in the state of Florida, though, if it's a first-degree offense, if it's a punishable offense, it's a capital offense that could potentially be punished by death, right? Punishable by death. By law, doesn't matter who you are. If you're a law enforcement officer or if you're a regular Joe Schmo on the street, that has to go before a grand jury. That's just law. If it's a first-degree premeditated murder, it has to go before a grand jury. Prosecutors don't have discretion on that. Well, anything less than that, anything, like second-degree murder, anything less than a capital offense, those cases do not have to be submitted to a grand jury. The problem in this country, the problem in the state of Florida is state attorneys have kind of taken the stance, well, whatever the offense, and if it involves a law enforcement officer, we're going to submit that to a grand jury. That will no longer be the practice under a Harold Pryor administration as the next state attorney of Broward County.
And we saw that, what you're saying about those secret grand juries in Ferguson, Missouri, in 2014, and the death of Michael Brown and the attorney at that time, Bob McCullough. That's pretty much exactly what he did. Presented it, and then he came back, threw his hand up. Well, and he pretty much just sided with the police right from the start. The witnesses that should have interviewed, he never interviewed them. He pretty much left it up to the grand jury, secret grand jury, and just threw his hands up and said it was a fair process. So right. I know exactly what you're talking about. I got one last question for you. Have there ever been a case that had you up late at night wondering whether you could have handled it differently?
No. Like I said, in the time that I was a prosecutor, I always went to sleep on the cool side of the pillow because I always tried to do the right thing. And like I said, if it was a bad case and it wasn't there and we didn't have the evidence or the facts to do it, we're dropping it. And I went to the head office many times because people disagreed with my stance on certain issues. And that's what I often prided myself on. No, I've never had that happen to me because I always did the right thing. I tried to do the right thing. And, because that's why I got into it. That's why I became a prosecutor. I didn't become a prosecutor because I wanted to just get guilty verdicts or because I wanted to get my trial numbers up. I actually went in because I experienced the hell of the criminal justice system firsthand, and I wanted to get in there and change it. And I was happy to do that when I was in that office. We put bad people in jail, don't get me wrong. I put some bad people in prison. But I also helped some innocent people, and I actually helped some people that probably weren't innocent, but deserved a second, third, or fourth chance. And I was happy to give those second or third, fourth chances when others weren't willing to do that. And that's why I did it. That's why I became a prosecutor.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Pryor, what do you consider your greatest strength? And if you're elected to the state attorney's office, how will you apply your greatest strength to the state attorney's office?
I think my greatest strength is being able to lead, to be a servant leader and bring people together. I truly, before I ran for this position and put my hat in the race, I remember just praying to God and saying, God, you sure? Me? Is there somebody else? And I actually actively went out and tried to seek other people to do it. And whenever I would go to these various people, I would go and say, hey, you want to run for state attorney? I'll back you. No, Harold, I don't want to do it. But you should do it, Harold. And that would happen 5 or 6 times where I try to find someone else and try to seek someone else to do it. And when I would talk to them and I said, well, why do you think that? Why do you think that? I actually think you would be better. And they're like, Harold, you have the leadership skills, you have the ability to bring people together, and you're a person that's willing to listen. And I think we need someone in this office that is willing to go out into the community, that could be at the forefront, that's not going to hide behind their desk, hide behind the office, and actually reach out to the community, listen to the community, and actually make these changes based on what the community is telling you. And I think we need that right now in our leadership, not only just in the state attorney's office, but we need that in our county commissions. We need that in our city commissions. We need that in the sheriff's office. We need that in law enforcement. We need people that are willing to lead, that can stand up to the pressures that come with any job, but also just willing to sit down and listen and actually work and bring people together. And I think those are my strongest qualities. And I think we need that right now.
Very well. Final question. Why should the voters of Broward County support you and vote for you rather than your opponents?
Yeah.
Tell us why you want to be the next state attorney here in Broward County.
Look, I'll tell anyone. I can tell you this. You can vote for anyone in this race. There's 8 qualified people. I'll tell you that. Really good people, right? But there are not many people that I think are suited to handle this job, especially in this time that we're in. Far too often, we've had people in office who didn't come from the communities that we serve, who don't understand the communities that they serve, that don't understand some of the issues that are affecting our people. It's one thing to serve as a public defender. It's one thing to represent a Black person. It's one thing to have Black friends and sympathize with them. But it's another thing to actually be Black, to be a Black man in America, to have been pulled over from age 14 all the way up until last year, and the officers not tell you one time as to why they pulled you over, to having a gun pulled on you, to having friends and family members killed due to gun violence, to having family and friends whose lives have been decimated by the failed war on drugs. It's one thing to talk about racial sentencing disparities and talk about mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex, but it's another thing when you've actually lived it and experienced it with your family members, when you've had to take those 8-hour day trips to a prison to go visit a family member, essentially just throwing away a whole day, right? Or paying someone's commissary and understanding that, you know, a honey bun is probably much more than what it would be out here on the streets, right? A honey bun in there might be $4 as opposed to 50 cents out here, right? These are some of the shared experiences that none of the candidates in this race have ever experienced. And this is the first time in our lifetime, in 44 years, since 1976, that we can have a state attorney who looks like us, who's actually experienced it and touched and felt the criminal justice system and understands that it needs to be reformed, but also understands that it doesn't matter who you are. It's a common misconception. I don't care who you are. If you live on Sistron, if you live in Dania Beach, if you live on Lighthouse Point, if you live wherever, Boca Raton, I don't care. If you live on Los Olas, I don't care where you live. Doesn't matter your race, color, creed, religious background. We all want safer communities. But we have to realize that we have a criminal justice system that has been traditionally stacked against people of color and poor people. It's just a fact. There's numbers out there that show it. So it's time for us to have elected officials. It's time for us to have law enforcement officers and sheriffs and state attorneys and officers that actually understand this and that actually can do it. I offer so many levels of experience, from experiences like I talked about in my personal life of having family members murdered, from having family members with mental health issues going to the criminal justice system, from family members with drug addiction issues and being mislabeled as criminals and bad people, but also from the standpoint of serving as a prosecutor, where I tried misdemeanor offenses all the way to serious felony offenses, where I also have a 2-year-old son. I worry about him every day. How am I going to raise him in this dangerous world? So with these varied experiences and serving as a civil attorney, serving as an in-house counsel for a multi-million-dollar company, where I managed budgets that were 3 times the budget of the state attorney's office, with those coupled levels of experiences, I truly believe that I'm the best person for the job, because the time is now. We need a state attorney that reflects the community that he or she serves, and that has workers, state attorneys, support staff that actually reflects the communities that it serves. So to close, I'm running to initiate ground level criminal justice reform while not compromising the safety of our communities. And so that means us eradicating the racial sentencing disparities, eradicating the school to prison pipeline, holding elected officials and law enforcement officers accountable, right? But also making those changes, but also understanding that we need safer communities, and that we can do that by not throwing everyone in prison, but reserving prison for the bad of the bad, right? So that's my goal. That's my plan as the next state attorney. And I think it's time for us to have someone that looks like us, that understands us, and that's ready to go in there day one and make these changes and can bring people together to actually make it a reality. Because it's one thing to say that I believe in criminal justice reform, but do you have the tools? Do you have the skill sets? Do you have the character traits to actually make it happen? And I truly believe that I am the best person in this race to actually do it, because we're all saying the same thing, but quite frankly, I don't think none of them in there that can do it. And I think I'm that person that can do it. I challenge everyone, look at every candidate, look at your candidate, ask yourself, why are you supporting this person? What is their trait? And ask yourself, does Harold have that trait? I guarantee I have that trait for every single last one of them. And that's why I think I'm the best person for this race.
Well, there you have it. Harold Pryor, he's running for state attorney, the 17th Judicial Circuit Court. We want to thank you for stopping by the Adams Brothers podcast. And when you're elected, don't forget about us. You're to come back and speak with us. You're always welcome to come back on this podcast show. And we do thank you for taking out the time to speak with us. And we wish you the best of luck on August the 18th.
Thank you. And it goes to accountability. That means me coming back and you all holding me accountable. But also, please check out, please.
We will.
And I want to encourage you and everyone to check out my website. My website is haroldpryor.com. So that's www.haroldpryor.com. We need volunteers. We need donations. But also, if you want a yard sign or whatever, please hit us up on our website. Check us out. You can learn more about me. haroldpryor.com. Thank you, and let's make history. Vote on August 18th.
There you have it, Harold Pryor. Good luck to you, sir. And
thank you, Gerald. Thank you, Wayne.
Hope to see you back on the Adams Brothers podcast real soon.
Oh, you will.
Have a good evening, sir.
Take care. You too, gentlemen. Take care.
All right.
Take care.